Welcome to your first speech presentation here, and oddly enough today I'll be talking about how to give a presentation, and particularly we'll focus on media, how to use your PowerPoint effectively. Hopefully you've watched your first little joke there, which is death by PowerPoint, and there's some things in that that are really funny. There's some other things that I disagree with him about. People have evolved in their use of PowerPoint just as they have in many other areas. So we'll talk a little bit today about what I want from you in your presentations, and some of the cold hard logistics of it. So there are many things involved in presentation media rather than just how to use the science of it. They've been using charts and graphs and object lessons since public speaking began. Very famously, these fables came from, oh, look over at the tree, let's talk about trees. So the speaker would have the audience sort of turn and use a visual. But these have become even more important in our modern day era when people are just bombarded with images and voices. And I was in Walmart yesterday and the end of the aisle was talking to me. There was this video and this woman was telling me which detergent I should use, and then at the same time someone was on the overhead conversation talking about somebody needs to come to checkout for. I mean, we're just bombarded. Meanwhile, I had my earbuds in playing my favorite song. So people have more access to media these days, so you need to make sure that the media that you are using is has the greatest impact, clarity, dynamicism, and that you know how to utilize it. So there are many different sorts of charts and graphs that you can use. You can see here that I have a line graph for you. You need to make sure that you know when to use certain types of graphs. So the line graph is good for depicting trends over time. How do things grow or change or evolve? Right, so you can imagine in 2000 you might only owe Motlow $0, but by the time we get to 2020, you steadily owe them more unless you can pay it back in a timely manner, right? That's the general nature of debt, as it grows. Right? A bar graph is really good at comparing variables quantitatively. So I often think of bar graphs in terms of height. Who's tallest there? Who has this benefit or this deficiency? So it's a straight comparison between objects or people to compare variables. So in this chart we have a pie or circle graph, and that helps us compare proportions of a whole. So if we were talking about a budget, right, what proportion of the budget goes to the military? What portion do I get to eat? What portion do other people get to eat? So pie or circle graphs show relative proportions of the whole. So you can think of any situation here in which chart you should do based on what kind of information you have to disclose. And then, as he said in the video, you don't want to overcomplicate your charts. You don't want to have 5 different statistics on one slide. We want to try to make it as interpretable, as digestible as we can. So there are other types of aids you can use. You can bring in an object lesson. Like I said, you can bring in, don't bring in your dog, they're messy, but you could bring in your childhood blanket. I saw a very cute speech dedicated to his blankie. You could bring in a cupcake if you're going to tell us how to make the cupcake, right? 3D objects are usually going to stimulate somebody's attention and draw them in. But there is a problem with things if they're too small. So you may want to use the projector in that situation. In every classroom at Motlow we have what's called the Elmo, and you can put that small item, if it were a diamond, yes, I've had someone bring diamonds, and put it on that white Elmo, and then it'll project up on the screen. That may be more advantageous than trying to pass around, oh, I don't know, a diamond. Although you do, you bring these things in at your own risk. Pictures, right? Pictures speak 1,000 words. Diagrams, which is what we just looked at there, right? And just a review there, line graphs are how they change over time. Bar graphs, comparison of variables, and then a pie graph is proportions of the whole. So just make sure anytime you have a statistic, I would always, 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 anytime you give a statistic, accompany it by a diagram of some sort, because numbers are so difficult for people to digest and understand. So, $1 in $5 in America is spent on something illegal, such as prostitution or marijuana. 1 in 5 is broken down for us. When you start talking about billions and billions of dollars, that completely can confuse people, and it loses its sense of concrete understanding. And so I almost always encourage you, anytime you have statistical data to present, put it in the form of a diagram so that people can visually see that representation. Right, and then condense the information into a chart. So in my class, you can use a YouTube video or use a film that you own, but you're only going to be able to present 30 seconds of that material. Now, I limit that because of your time. You may be asked to speak for 6 minutes. I don't want you showing a 6-minute video and saying you did a speech. So only limit your presentation media in the form of film or video to 30 seconds. And the same applies to a song, right? If you have a song you want us to hear, please don't underscore your entire speech with a song. That can be very, very distracting. Only keep it to a 30-second minimum of clip. We do want to make sure that that video is somewhat appropriate, right? If you're going to show a graphic image, for example, I had a student talk about abortion and show a partial birth abortion in the form of video. You just want to tell people before those images are going to come up on the screen, give kind of a disclaimer. This is about to happen. Please, if you want to dismiss yourself, I understand. And that just gives people a sense of not being attacked or affronted with the content you present to them. Like I said, shock tactics are not appreciated in my course. So, a handout. So if you would like to do handwriting samples and you're talking about the psychology of handwriting, then by all means use that handout. But I'm going to encourage you, if you do have handouts, to save them for the end, because sometimes what happens is people are so busy reading your handout that they're forgetting what you say. So, make sure that if you are going to give everybody a worksheet, that you hand those out after your speech is over. Or a brochure or a pamphlet if you want to tell us about a charity and the charity gives you pamphlets. Wait until the end of your presentation to hand everybody a pamphlet before they leave. But those are great ways to have some take-home for the people to go back and look on their own on the internet, or call in. Whatever action you're trying to get them to take, it's much easier if they have a source in their hand. Alright, so this is a picture of my husband and our dog Lurleen. She's a little Boston Terrier there. Now, I could take the time to tell you what my husband looks like. I could sit and describe him. Well, it kind of looks like Doogie Howser, but it's much easier to show you a picture of him. And the words are much less meaningful than the picture. So sometimes it's just a matter of showing us before you talk about it. So in the definition process, right, you're defining to us who you're paying tribute to. Show us a picture of that person so that we can start to digest and assign meaning to them. Especially if it's a celebrity or somebody we might already be aware of. If you show us a picture of Malcolm X as you pay tribute to him, then, oh, okay, that's what he looks like. I've seen that guy before. Isn't there a movie about him, right? And those are the kind of conversations that people will start to have. So as you define things, pictures can help clarify the situation. And you notice that I did pick a kind of pitiful picture, but I could have picked one much worse, right, when we talk about neglect or abuse. But they can have an emotional impact. If you're talking about starving children in Africa, by all means begin with a picture of a child. Humanize that. Make it real for us, because pictures can create a gut reaction, an emotional reaction that's very powerful. Maybe you have personality or style or charm that can come through your PowerPoint presentation. By all means, express yourself, right? As long as it's within the professional context. We still want to be professional, but there is a certain amount of charm or personality you can bring through your visual presentations. And for a lot of us, we rely on those slides to help us feel more confident as we present, right? As we have that behind us, maybe people are looking at the slide instead of always looking at us, making eye contact with us. And we can kind of, to a certain extent, let the slides become the focal point rather than us being the focal point. But the other thing that it does is help you remember what's next as you looked at those critical thinking skills from chapter 1, or as you will. You know, some of us don't have good memories. For one reason or another, we can't remember the next thing we were going to say. Well, as we rely on those slides, they can kind of prompt us. Now, we're not going to just read from the slides. I will not give you an A if you stand there and read every single word off of your slide. And the reason that I do that is, once again, you're not accounting for the people in the audience. If you have your back to us and we're looking at your butt while you're reading these slides, then it's very boring for us. You need to watch our faces, watch for our reaction. And those slides can become a hindering block if you're too shy in turning towards the slides and turning away from us. So as you ask yourself, is this slide necessary? Right? Is this slide going to add to my conversation, or is it going to detract from it? If you brought in a puppy, the puppy would become what your speech was about, whether you meant for it or not, because it would upstage you, to use theater language. It needs to only be a supplement to the speech. It doesn't need to be the entirety of the speech. And if you're being upstaged by it, then it's not doing its job. Understand that it can distract from what you're saying. Never talk while a video is going. Never talk while something is moving on the screen, because I guarantee you they're not listening to what you're saying. They're watching the things move on the screen. And don't ever use graphics that move, because they will become infinitely more interesting than what you're saying. When you're really trying to get down to it, ask, does this help me communicate? Does this help me make the audience understand? Or is it distracting them? As soon as it becomes a distraction, forget it. Throw it away, start over. So we don't want to rely too heavily on our slides. We already talked about that just a second ago. Don't rely too heavily on your slides. Face your audience, not the screen, right? We don't want to turn around. Now, the way that you can kind of cheat with this is there's a computer monitor in front of you. And you want to look at the computer monitor, because the computer monitor has your exact same thing that's behind you. You got to just trust that. And I'm not saying you can't glance back at your screen, but if you do, chances are you're going to turn away from your audience, and we never want to lose that contact with them. So see how I'm sort of unfolding these one at a time, and I'm going to challenge you to do the same thing, because if you just throw up a whole lot of content onto the slide and don't give people time to digest it, then it becomes noise and becomes overwhelming, and either they ignore it or spend the entire time reading it while you're talking. So if you can, reveal your thoughts one at a time. The book says only 6 words per line, and in general I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. You don't want to use tiny little font that people in the back row can't read, and you also don't want to fill your entire slides. Right here it says it again, only 6 lines per slide. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb too. I've had people cut and paste their entire speech into a slide, and that is not effective. Remember, we want to speak extemporaneously. We want to speak in a way that is spontaneous and relates to our audience and feels like a conversation. If we're standing there reading, it's going to become didactic, it's going to come impersonal, and people are going to get bored. So try to limit your thoughts to concise, short phrases that are digestible and comprehensible. Okay, so before we get into the dangerous world of fonts, let's talk just a minute about how to create a PowerPoint. So if you'll forgive my sort of coming out of here, I am using PowerPoint for Windows Mac here. So your page might not look exactly like this, but there's a good chance that it will. So let's add a new slide. Right, I can do that right there. Let's call this one fake slide. Now, okay, so I've got 3 different ones here, and I want them to animate. I can go up here to animation, right, and then appear. Now, my default setting is that they appear one at a time. So when I would present this, right, I press my space bar, point number 1, or if hopefully you'll have the clicker in your hand. Remember, when you present, I'll give you a clicker. And then point number 2 will reveal, and point number 3. So you'll see that I left the default setting, what the original guy would call lazy. But I do prefer, as we'll talk about here in a second, the fonts to be understandable and clear. So if I was going to change the font, I would highlight it first, right? And then I would come up here and just pick my font. Then I might want to make this the exact same thing. So I'm going to highlight it and pick my font again. Now maybe I want that top slide to be even bigger. I can change the font size. And I realize that for a lot of you this is a review, but I just want to kind of orient you to what this is. Maybe I want to insert a picture, cut and paste it off the internet or somewhere else, my personal pictures. There's lots that we can do here. But let's get into how this can be a little bit dangerous. The dangerous world of fonts. All right, so anytime you use a font that is hard to read from the back of the room or not appropriate to the professional setting, you could lose respect from some of your audience members, right? If you were giving a speech on the Holocaust and you put hearts over your eyes, there's a good chance that people are not going to take you seriously. If you're talking to a room full of third graders, then maybe Times New Romances is a font you need to use. Always keep your background white. Always keep the background white, because once you put different colors on top of a color, especially with some of our bulbs at Motlow that are older and don't have good color distinction, people will not be able to read it, and people can have an emotional reaction to those colors you're not meaning for them to have. So it will usually hinder your communication. So try as much as you can to have a white background with black ink. All right, never put your text box over the picture because it's almost impossible to read. Always make sure that your picture is only part of your presentation, your writing is on the other side of your slide. And this can sometimes be a formatting issue, like if you're trying to transfer a Mac to a PC, then you may have trouble with them putting your text box where you didn't initially plan for it to be. So just take a second before you open your PowerPoint and make sure that your slides are the way you want them to look. Yay, puppies. I like that little brown one down in the middle. But do you see how distracting this is, right? Do you really need 6 pictures of a puppy, or could you just have 1 picture of a puppy? Because if you have too many examples, then it's distracting, right? Usually we just want to stick to 1 illustration per point rather than puppy overload. I'm so bad about doing this. Putting things on the bottom third of the screen, especially if you're in Motlow and it's a small room like that and it's not, the seating is all one level, then people have to kind of lean to look over each other's heads to see what's at the very bottom of the slide. So as much as possible, try to stick to the top 2/3 of the slide. All right, now the last thing that I really want to challenge you is maybe using Prezi. Prezi is a, here we go here. Prezi is a kind of presentation where you can zoom in and out. So I'm going to show the video. You won't be able to hear the sound on it, but that's actually okay because... So, and it also, like, it saves it online. So see how it can zoom in and out. And I really think this is the future of business when it comes to presentation. So if you're particularly planning to go into presenting business, I would recommend Prezi. I think it's interesting. And who knows, in 5 or 10 years, how we'll be presenting. It'll probably be something closer to a Mission Impossible room, and we can't even imagine how that happens. It also helps, the thing I like about Prezi is you can tell the relationship between the points, so you can map things out kind of like you would a collage, and so that you can see the relationships between the points. Alright, so I think on that note, we are pretty much done. As you create your PowerPoints, be concise, be clear, make them understandable. Make sure that they're adding to your story and not taking away from it. Remember, your first humorous anecdote speech, I am requiring you to create some sort of presentation media. Now, if it's a PowerPoint slide with just one slide that has your name on it, that's fine. It's really just more about you coming up to face the Smart Station and start to learn where to put your thumb drive, and for me to just make sure that you are investing in the software, you're starting to understand either Prezi or PowerPoint, and that you have a plan for how to present your media in the future. If you're telling a story about your cat, maybe you want to put your cat up there, right? But we want to make sure that that PowerPoint is not over the top or overly distracting. Please don't illustrate every single point you have. This is only a 2 to 3 minute conversation, so we should not have more than maybe 5 slides because it could get distracting if you were just completely showing us your PowerPoint slide. But take a good old-fashioned stab at it, and I'll give you some feedback on it, and we'll work from there. Thank you for listening.